Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered why the price of your favorite imported coffee, or maybe that new smartphone, just seems to randomly fluctuate? Or how entire nations somehow keep track of trillions of dollars flowing back and forth across their borders every single day? Well, if you have, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're unpacking the massive global economic forces that dictate how countries trade and, ultimately, how much you end up paying for imported goods. So, how in the world does an entire country balance its checkbook? It sounds like a massive, incredibly complicated undertaking, right? But honestly, if we look at it just like balancing your own personal checkbook, money coming in, money going out, it suddenly makes perfect sense. Every single transaction between a country and the rest of the world has to be accounted for. And just like your own bank account, spending more than you earn creates a whole host of problems that require some very strategic fixing. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting the global economic ledger, when the ledger leaks, fixing the deficit gap, the exchange rate engine, and finally, currency values and you. Let's jump right in. Section 1, the global economic ledger. Okay, so let's get the official definition out of the way. The balance of payments, or BOP for short, is basically the master ledger for a country's entire economy. It's a systematic record that captures absolutely everything. I mean, if a resident, a local business, or the government itself makes any kind of economic transaction with the rest of the world over a specific period, usually a year, it gets written down right here. No exceptions. Now, this massive master ledger is split up into two main buckets. First, we have the current account. This is the day-to-day stuff. Trade of goods and services, income receipts, all the things that directly affect a country's income. On the flip side, we have the capital account. This handles the bigger, longer-term stuff. Changes in assets, investments, foreign direct investment, or major international borrowing. Just like that checkbook we talked about earlier, credits mean money is flowing into the country. That's the good stuff. Debits, well, that represents money flowing out. So exports and foreign loans bring in foreign currency, landing firmly on the credit side. Conversely, imports and lending money abroad, that spends your foreign currency, dropping it onto the debit side. Obviously, having more money flowing in overall gives you a favorable balance of payments. Inside that current account we just mentioned, things get pretty interesting because trade actually separates into visible and invisible categories. Visible trade is exactly what it sounds like: tangible, physical merchandise. We're talking cars, aluminum, tea, iron ore, stuff you can actually put on a massive cargo ship. But there is a whole other world of invisible streams out there. These are intangible services like banking, tourism, financial incomes like dividends, and things called unilateral transfers. Basically, unilateral transfers are just one-way cash flows, like a gift or cash remittances sent home by families working overseas. Moving on to Section 2, when the ledger leaks. So what happens when a country spends way more than it earns? Well, you get a deficit, and that can be triggered by a whole bunch of factors. For example, high domestic inflation makes a country's own goods super expensive, which ironically encourages its citizens to just buy cheaper imports from abroad. Or think about developing nations. They often run into deficits because of heavy developmental expenditures. They absolutely have to import heavy machinery, raw materials, and tech just to build up their infrastructure. Add in growing population pressures demanding more consumer goods, or a sudden drop in foreign demand for your exports, and boom, that ledger starts leaking rapidly. When that deficit hits, countries have to find some way to balance the scales. And this introduces a really fascinating distinction between the types of capital flowing into a country. First, you have autonomous flows. These are your everyday independent market transactions. Like if a foreign company builds a factory in your country just to make a profit, that's autonomous. But accommodating flows are totally different. These are specialized compensatory funds, think emergency borrowing, that are deployed exclusively to patch up that leaking deficit and literally force the overall balance of payments back into equilibrium. Which brings us to Section 3, fixing the deficit gap. Okay, so how do governments stop the bleeding? Usually, they step in to physically or financially suppress imports. They might use import quotas, which act as a direct, non-negotiable physical ceiling on exactly how much of a foreign good is allowed into the country. Because quotas are a hard barrier, they are highly effective and immediate. On the other hand, they might use tariffs. Think of tariffs as import duties, acting like financial speed bumps. They inflate the price of the foreign good, with the hope that the higher price tag will deter local consumers from actually buying it. But it's not all about blocking borders. Domestically, governments have a whole toolkit of corrective policies they can deploy. They can stimulate their own exports by handing out subsidies or tax exemptions to local businesses. They can push to produce import substitutes, which just means making things locally so you don't have to buy them from abroad. And they can pull some massive macroeconomic levers. The central bank could use monetary policy to hike up interest rates, making borrowing super expensive. Or the government can use fiscal policy to raise taxes. Actually, both of those actions do the exact same thing. They reduce citizens' disposable income, leaving them with way less money to spend on imported goods. Now, here is an absolutely crucial distinction regarding the currency itself. Sometimes a currency loses value naturally, just based on supply and demand in the open market. That is called depreciation. But under a fixed exchange rate system, a government might intentionally, officially, lower its currency's value, and that is called devaluation. Now, whether it happens organically through depreciation or artificially through devaluation, the end result is exactly the same. It helps correct deficits by making foreign imports way more expensive for locals, while simultaneously making domestic exports a lot cheaper and more attractive to foreign buyers. Let's transition to Section 4, the exchange rate engine. So how do we actually decide what a currency is worth? Globally, countries usually run on one of two systems. In a fixed exchange rate system, the rate is officially pegged and aggressively maintained by the central bank, which promises to buy and sell its currency at one specific price. But most countries today use a flexible or floating exchange rate system. Here, the value is determined entirely by the free market, just pure demand and supply. Though, to be totally accurate, most use what's called a managed floating system, or a dirty float. That's where the market sets the rate, but the central bank will occasionally step in and buy or sell currencies just to prevent extreme, crazy volatility. In a flexible market, price is found entirely through domestic demand and supply. Think about the demand for dollars that comes from domestic importers. As the price of a dollar goes down, they naturally want more of them so they can buy cheap foreign goods. Now flip it. The supply of dollars comes from domestic exporters. When the exchange rate is high, they are making bank on their foreign sales, so they pump more dollars into the market. And that magical point where the demand perfectly matches the supply, that's our equilibrium exchange rate. At this exact intersection, the market clears completely, naturally. No government intervention needed. If the rate gets a bit too high, a surplus of dollars forces the price right back down. If it drops too low, a shortage of dollars bids the price back up. It's a beautifully self-correcting engine. Finally, Section 5, Currency Values and UM. Okay, let's zoom in a bit. Why does all this macro math actually matter to you and your wallet? Well, imagine a standard pair of imported jeans with a base cost of $20 US. The price you actually pay at your local mall changes entirely based on the strength of your domestic currency. And get this, it changes even if the US manufacturer literally never touches their price tag. Let's actually run the numbers here. Say we have a baseline exchange rate of 45 rupees per dollar. Those $20 jeans will cost you 900 rupees locally. Pretty straightforward. But let's say your home currency depreciates to 50 rupees per dollar, meaning it takes more of your hard-earned cash to buy a single US dollar. Suddenly, that exact same pair of jeans jumps to 1,000 rupees. On the other hand, if your currency appreciates, getting stronger at, say, 40 rupees to the dollar, those jeans drop down to just 800 rupees. Ultimately, the big takeaway here is that every single shift in that massive global economic ledger, every little tweak in monetary policy, and every single fluctuation in the currency market trickles right down to dictate the price tags you see on the shelves every single day. Yes, a weaker domestic currency makes foreign goods way more expensive for you, but remember, it's often the necessary medicine a country just has to take to fix a leaking balance of payments. So here's a question for you to think about. The next time you buy an imported product, whether it's a shiny new smartphone, a car, or just that pair of jeans, ask yourself, are you just paying for the item itself, or are you secretly paying the price for your country's balance of payments? Think about how these invisible global forces are shaping your wallet right now. Thanks so much for joining me today to unpack the mechanics of global trade.